Alright guys, we are back for another video. Today we're going to finish up the fuel system. We left off getting the injectors and the CP3 put in. Now we're going to get our lift pump. Airdog was nice enough to send us one of their 4G 200 gallon per hour pumps. And a bunch of swag. We got this sweet hat, sweet t-shirt. So pretty standard. You get your instructions on how to install this. You get your wire harness. You get your black fuel line. I like the black stuff a little bit better than the blue stuff some other companies run. Just kind of hides it a little nicer, a little bit cleaner of an install. We do have our draw straw, which we will not be using. And then you get your fittings. And one of my favorite parts about the Airdog system is their mounting kit, because it mounts it up out of the way so it doesn't just sag there by the one bed bolt. So I'm a huge fan of the Airdog mount. And then of course we have our fuel filter and our drainable water separator, which again is a great feature. Yeah, going over it, you have an external pressure regulator, which is huge. I love this feature. So much easier than a spring and check ball. You have a gauge port, and then obviously you have your inlet outlet, and these are very easy to install. So huge thank you to the guys over in Indiana at PureFlow Airdog. I have two of these 200 gallon per hour pumps on the race truck, one 165 pump on my tow truck, and now for this project we're going to get a 200 gallon per hour. Another thing, the hose, plenty to do even a long bed crew cab truck, which is nice, and they separate their fittings. In addition to the Airdog, we're also going to be installing our XDP 2-bolt sump. What I like about the XDP ones is they have a return with this little standpipe that goes in here. That way you're not swirling fuel right back where it's trying to suck it out of. Again, I like sumps, just a little bit easier to install. You don't have to worry about cutting the tube just perfect. And then last but not least, I have tried the fleece one. I've tried the beans one. I figured, what the heck, let's give BD Diesel a try. So this is the BD Diesel fuel distribution block. Again, this will be your factory bangeable in and out. You have room for dual pumps, and it also comes with a gauge sensor as well. This mounts to the side of the cylinder head, and it comes with all the fittings you need to install it. Again, I've never used the BD one. I'm always down to try new stuff, so we'll see how this one works out. First thing we got to do, we're going to go ahead and drill the bottom of the fuel tank for the sump hole and get the fuel draining. I was an idiot, filled this truck up, so there's about 3/4 of a tank. Luckily, I brought the tow truck in today that has a quarter tank, so we'll go ahead, get it drilled. I suggest drilling it right. There's a little flat spot on the tank. We'll show you guys here in a second. So you're going to want to drill a tank. Now with the XDP return sump straw, you want to avoid the area right under the sending unit. If you run a regular one hole where it doesn't have a return, you can't do it here. I found right in between the boss for this and some of the slosh back bosses, you go right here, and I usually use the backing plate to kind of center it up, make sure we're in a good spot where this backing plate will have plenty of room. And then I drill my hole. Get yourself a drain pan. Apparently there's still a lot of fuel in there. So you finish drilling. After you get the hole in, apparently we didn't have all the fuel out.
Well, you know what, Josh?
Big jobs. It's alright. Once you got it pretty much drained out, finish your hole. Just like so. I would recommend safety glasses, but we don't have time for that. Then all you're going to do is clean all the shavings from around the hole. Little razor blade action. Works pretty nicely. Again, you're just trying to make sure it seals up well on the sump. And then you just reach your finger up in there, get all the debris out, and you can kind of feel where the bosses are at. And the beauty of a sump is you're installing this $700 fuel system. You better be able to trust it to deal with a little bit of plastic. That's always been my argument. And you make sure this plate's got plenty of room to go forward and back. Let the rest of the fuel drain out, and we'll get the sump installed. It's just 2 bolts, super simple. Make sure your return and your fittings are tight in there, because you do not want to be tightening them against the rubber tank. You'll deform the tank a little bit, and you're opening yourself up to a lot of leaks. You're gonna take your sump. This is machined for the return boss. You're gonna go ahead and get one of the bolts in. It is a 7/32. For some reason, I love how all these American diesel companies love to use American threads on trucks that are just full metric. Like, still to this day makes no sense to me. But anyway, you get it started a couple threads, then you get your other bolt, and you get that one started. Get it in a couple threads. And then with these, I find they like to bind, so I tighten them a little bit at a time. Alright, now you want to orient the sump. I find kind of a, like if this is 12 o'clock, this is 6 o'clock, like a nice little 10 o'clock action towards the front. Then you can grab this for a little line clamp action. Tighten it up like so, and then I think the torque spec's like 10 foot-pounds. Gonna brake clean it off and make sure you got a good seal all the way around. And then what I like to do, obviously you can't put any fuel back in it until you get the return and feed line put on, but as soon as you get that put on, put some fuel in it. That way while it's still in the shop, you can make sure you don't have any leaks. I've never really had an issue with these 2-bolt or the 1-bolt style. The only time I've ever had issues with the sumps are the ones that use like a flange seal where it's 8 bolts and they have that crappy gasket that goes around. If you guys are in the market for one of these XDP ones are good. I think Airdog makes one. I'm sure that one's just as good. And then a lot of popular one is the Beans diesel one. That one also works really good. So, had good luck. Now we're gonna move on. Next thing we're gonna do is get the pump mounted. Once we get the pump mounted, then we can start running the harnesses and the fuel lines. Let's get started. Airdog sets you up for a return in the filler neck. This is a nice feature. A lot of companies don't have this piece. Now with our XDP sump, we don't need it. But again, I just want to point out that they do include that. That is a piece that you get done and you're like, crap, I don't have that. All right, moving along, we have the Airdog pump bracket, which is right here. And the spacer, they also include some extra O-rings, which is nice. Zip ties, which is a nice touch. All right, so we have our pump. We got to get it to the bracket. We got to get our fittings in. Airdog supplies you with all the hardware, which is super nice. You have your long chrome-plated bolts. These are for the sandwich bracket that goes around the frame. You have your black oxide bolts that mount the bracket to the sandwich plates with this spacer. And then you have these little Allen head screws that mounts the pump to the bracket. You're gonna do it where the tabs are facing up, like so. And the Allen heads sit inside of the pump base here. And these get a lock washer and a nut. And you'll basically put them all 4 on nice and loose. Now, you have 2 options. You can mount this bracket onto the mounting plates first, or you could do like we're doing, and you could take the filters off, like so. And you can get to the bolts back here. Again, I like doing it this way because then I can see how tall the pump actually is with the filters, so I can get it properly aligned on the frame, tucked up and out of the way. Alright, so as you can see here, we got it mocked up with just the 2 bolts. Again, we're trying to figure out where the height needs to be on the pump in relation to where it mounts to the frame. So I always recommend just a couple bolts hand tight so you can do your test fit. So as you can see here, we got it test fitted. One thing to look at is all the mounts for the cab. Make sure you can clear all your frame rails and stuff like that. Obviously on this one we're good. The return line makes a steep 90 and goes back. The supply line is here, which is unblocked, and the supply line to the CP3 is good. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing mounted firm on this block and then get it mounted to the truck. Now we're going to go ahead and put our fittings into the Airdog. The smallest one is going to be your return side. Again, just thread it in hand tight. Then you have 3 other fittings. You have 2 with O-rings, 1 without. This is going to be your CP3 inlet. They do include a rubber impregnated washer. So we'll set that off to the side for the CP3. Again, just put them in hand tight. Then you're going to want to tighten them down with a socket. Obviously make sure your O-rings are lubed, diesel fuel, motor oil, something, that way they're not going in dry. Now we're going to go ahead and mount this on the frame. This is going to be very difficult to show you because Meyer's going to have to help me. So basically this plate with only the 4 holes goes on the back side of the pump or the frame rail, and then obviously the one with all the holes for the different heights goes on the pump side. You're going to do 2 bolts up top, and then they have a dual plate here for different thicknesses of frame rails. I do believe the thicker one is the one we will be using, where we're grabbing it on the frame. There's a reinforcement there. And again, you're just going to put the 3 bolts in, and you're going to want to make sure you tighten them evenly down. And we'll kind of show you what this pump looks like mounted once we get it in. And as you guys can see here, we got the Airdog pump mounted. We did have to lower it down 1 more hole to clear the body mount. Again, this is right in front of the quad cab's doors where they meet in the middle. Getting it tightened up on the frame. Meyer's finishing up the last bolt. We have a clear shot for the suction side, and up front we have a straight shot here. And from the downside, you can only kind of see the filters just a little bit. So not a bad install. Again, shout out to the guys at Airdog on this mounting system. So much nicer than the bed mount bolt that likes to come loose. Now that we've mounted the pump, we're gonna go ahead and do the harness. Harness is pretty easy. You have your relay right here. This mounts up kind of on the firewall, is a good spot. This is your fuse. From the fuse, you have your positive and negative terminals. These go to the battery. Then you have your Airdog power supply to the pump right here. This is going to be your fuel heater plug if you choose to run one. We are omitting that on this truck. And you have your jumper harness. Again, this is what triggers the relay. This plug is located on top of the fuel tank. This is by far the hardest part of an Airdog install, or any lift pump install that uses the factory harness as a trigger, is getting the old one off. It does have a red safety latch that you need, so it'll kind of look like this will be shut. You open that up. Usually I use a screwdriver, pinch it, wiggle it off. You hook this one up to the incoming harness. This one hooks up to the top of the fuel sending unit, and then you route it accordingly. And then from there, we will start running our fuel lines. Now this install will be a little different because we are using this BD fuel distribution block. So basically it'll go tank to the Airdog, return from the Airdog to the tank, and then the feed line from the CP3 will go to the distribution block. From the distribution block, it will then go to the CP3, and this block also deletes the factory fuel bowl. I usually do that on every truck I install an Airdog on. Again, never used the BD one. Looks to be pretty good quality. We'll give it a shot and I'll give an honest review on it. All right, Airdog harnesses, pretty easy. I like to lay them out starting up here, and then I work my way back to the pump. I like to have my relay box about right here. This is where I set it up, kind of up here on the firewall. That makes it easy. So I just start sorting the wires. This is the fuel heater supply. This one I just kind of put off to the side for right now. This is our battery. Caught up in the bumper. This is our battery harness. So again, this one will kind of run around here. What we'll do is we'll just route this around on the outside here. Again, I am not Battleship 67. If you guys don't follow him on Instagram, you probably should. That guy could wire tuck just about anything. He does great work. Again, I'll put his Instagram name on here for you guys. And I will usually run the harness around the back side of this, like so. I don't like putting a bunch of holes in my firewall if I can avoid it. So what I will do is just in right here. Again, it's kind of pinched by the factory harness. Now, again, this is your fuel heater. We got our battery terminal wires right here. And then this is the main harness that goes back to the Airdog. I usually try to follow the brake lines. Basically, I follow these brake lines down and go down into the frame rail. I'll kind of show you guys where it comes out down there. As you guys can see, we got it dropped down by the frame rail. And what I do is I will follow this fuel line to right here, put the harness on the outside of the frame rail because the Airdog's on the outside, and I will make my way back all the way to the Airdog, which is right here. All right, so you can see here we got our Airdog harness. Kind of ran a little loosely. Got a lot of slack, not a big deal. We'll deal with that after we get it connected. Now, once you're back here to the tank, you have to do the jumper harness. And here's the culprit right up here. We have the factory fuel sending unit. You can see the factory white plug that we have to disconnect to run our jumper harness. Now, as you guys can see here, I got it disconnected. That is the plug that you're gonna need to use. I got really lucky. I didn't have to drop the fuel tank on this one. So we're gonna go ahead and get our jumper harness wired into this. Now, as you can see, we got our jumper harness plugged in. We're gonna go ahead and secure the harness and move on towards the pump. Now we got our harness ran up here towards the front of the fuel tank. We're gonna go ahead and plug the Airdog power supply, which is the plug on the left hand side. And then I usually put a little Ziploc baggie around the fuel heater plug in case one day I ever decide to change my mind. We'll just run that on the other side of the frame rail through the hole. Doing this on the ground just like most of you guys will be doing. We got our Airdog power supply hooked up. We're going to zip tie it on the other side of the frame right here. And then from here, we will secure the slack in the harness, which you can see kind of drops down right here by the T-case and goes up. And we'll get that secured. I usually secure it up by the battery, and then we'll move on to the fuel lines. All right, so we have our sump installed. We have our Airdog mounted. This back fitting here is the supply side. So we're gonna run a hose from the Airdog to the sump, and then we're gonna run another one from the sump return to the Airdog return, which is going to be the small fitting on the inboard side, and then that outboard side fitting that faces forward. Before you start cutting this line up, I always start and lay it out, knowing what fittings I'm gonna use where. The sump is a push-on style with 2 hose clamps. The return line is going to be this little 90, so you can kick it up to the frame rail. Then you have your inlet to the Airdog from the sump, which will be one of these straight fittings. or you can also use one of the 90s. On this truck, given the location, we're just going to use straights. And then we have our straight fitting coming off the Airdog to our engine bay. And finally, we have our straight fitting from the CP3 pump to the supply line. So that's how it gets laid out. We're gonna go ahead and get our hoses cut. Once we get our hoses cut, we'll put the fittings in, and I'll show you guys a little trick to getting these fittings on this hose a little easier. All right, so choosing a routing from the sump to the Airdog, I love to go as directly as possible up towards the frame, and I will run both hoses right next to this bed bracket here, the one that the emergency brake cable goes through, and I'll run a double line clamp right there to keep them nice and secure in case this pavement princess ever does wind up off-road. The fuel lines are protected. Once you have your hoses cut, we have a long one and a shorter one. The shorter one is going to be the supply line. The longer one will be the return line. What I do is I take a little bit of engine oil. Again, these little squirt cans come in handy. Buy these at Harbor Freight. I can't even tell you how much we use these, whether it's engine assembly or AN hose assembly or stuff like this. They come in handy. You take your heat gun, and what you do is you heat up the end of the hose. Again, you're not trying to catch it on fire. You just want to make it more pliable so it will accept that plastic fitting a little easier. Again, this is not a fancy tool. Got this at Harbor Freight. These are like 10-12 bucks, I think. You can do a super coupon. So you'll heat up the hose and you'll slide your fitting in like so, and it just goes on like butter. We have full engagement on the hose there. So we have our lines ran. These are those clamps I'm talking about. You can get them at Summit. They hold 2 half-inch lines. And got our lines ran to the pump here. So we'll go ahead, zip tie the lines together, and those things are not going anywhere, I promise. Very strong way to mount them. So what I do, once you zip tie them, they're not moving at all. And it keeps it far enough away from the brake cable as well, which is a nice feature. From here, we're on the homeward stretch. We have the pump harness, the fuel heater. We have our fuel supply line ran. So now what we're gonna go ahead and do is take the fuel bowl out. To do that, there are 2 banjo bolts, one on the front, one on the back side. There is a quick disconnect fitting as well. And then there is a wire harness here on this side, and then there's one on the bottom side. So we'll go ahead and get all that disconnected, and then it's just 2 10mm bolts up on the intake shelf, and we will get that off. So as you can see, we got our factory fuel bowl out. That factory line right there will kind of fight you. And then you have your fuel heater and your water and fuel sensor. And I'll take you guys outside the truck. And here's your factory fuel bowl. A little easier to see. You're gonna disconnect the factory return from the CP3. This is your drain hose. This is the petcock valve to drain it. I do recommend draining this before you start. Here is your water and fuel sensor, which we will be putting in the BD unit. And yeah, there she is. Again, you don't have to get rid of this if you don't want to, but I do it just to clear up room under the engine bay. Now we'll get our BD unit mounted. So far, I like what I see. We're gonna lay it out a little bit. All right, so we have our BD unit. A little limited on space these days. Looks like they supplied new hardware. However, we have the on this unit, the dipstick gets retained by one of these, so I don't know if we'll use it, but I'll give them a thumbs up for that. We have quite a bunch of different plugs here. Looks like we will have, judging by the flow in this box here. This whole bottom part is going to be the feed. This top part is the return, so your factory lines will go here. So we'll probably feed our Airdog right here, and then we will get our outlet on the front here. Now, because we are using the factory 5.9 stuff, we are going to plug a few of these holes here. Plug this one. Let's see. Plug this return. Plug this port on the feed side, and we'll plug this port on the feed side. Obviously, we got to tighten these up a little bit. And then it looks like our fittings will sit like this and like this. This will go towards the CP3. So we got that kind of laid out. Now we'll just go ahead and get everything tightened up. They do include an 1/8 inch NPT port, which is cool, but we're going to go ahead and put our fuel pressure sensor in here. That way, or actually for this, we'll probably use a mechanical gauge until we get around to installing our low pressure fuel gauge. So we'll put a little gauge in here for a test port. So far, I've been enjoying this BD distribution block. However, I have just ran into my first issue with it. This block does not allow you to retain the factory water and fuel separator like the fleece product does. So I'll give them 2 thumbs up for new hardware, but I'm going to give them 1 thumbs down for not being able to reuse the water and fuel. They say to just electrical tape it and extend the harness and make a new port for it. So for that, again, not a deal breaker, just kind of sucks. Wish they would have just made it a hookup there, made it a little bit more universal, especially for the 5.9 guys. So now we'll go ahead and get this put on, get it mounted to the cylinder head, and start getting our lines ran. All right, moving back on to the Airdog installation. This is the CP3 fitting. Again, because we are using a 6.7 pump, the feed is on the front side. So we'll go ahead and get this tightened in. There is a copper washer that goes on here. Make sure you don't forget that. Again, this is an aluminum pump with a very rough fitting, or aluminum fitting. So just snug. We got that installed, and now we have our BD distribution block. As you can see, it tucks in nicely there. 2 dislikes so far: water and fuel separator gone, or the sensor. And then if you use their hardware, the dipstick's kind of unsecure, so I used the old factory one. Other than that, so far it's gone in, no issues. Got the return circuit, which is the front circuit, and the return from the back of the head all plumbed into this. Everything threaded in nicely. Now we'll just go ahead and run our line from the Airdog to the distribution, and the distribution to the CP3. I'll get that knocked out here real quick. have our line ran to the CP3, our factory return hooked up. Obviously we got some zip ties we need to cut, but overall the BD went in without a issue other than the water and fuel. We got the factory supply line bagged up and taped off. We have our water and fuel heater, again, zip tied and bagged. Just a quick tech tip for you guys while I hang up this light. Number one, this snap-on underhood light, 10 out of 10, I would recommend. Followed up with a set of snap-on flush cuts. Unless you hate the person that's working on your truck, these allow you to cut the zip ties nice and flush. So we'll go ahead, cut the zip ties, then we gotta finish up some wiring over here in this corner. We got our harness tucked in here, all nice. I just tucked the extra in the fender. I tucked the extra of this inside this fender so you can't see it. Again, I'm not the best at wiring. So we got it all hooked up. We're gonna hook up these last two battery terminals. We got fuel in the tank. The sump is not leaking. Next, we're gonna go ahead, get the system primed and set the pressure. Because this is a 12 mil stroker pump, we do need to turn it down. These come factory preset at 18 PSI, I believe. Dynamite recommends about 15 PSI on their 12 mil pump. So we have a gauge, we'll get that hooked up and set the pressure. So something I see a lot on third gens is dirty battery terminals. As you can see, this one a little crusty, actually pretty crusty. So I use this neutralizer, and we're gonna go ahead kind of scrub this off here. Again, on an electronically injected truck, having clean battery terminals, even for you VP guys, even the 12 valve guys, like having clean terminals, very important. So we'll go ahead and get that cleaned up, and we'll get the crossover cable cleaned up. Oof, that one's really nasty. And then we'll put some terminal protectant on. Again, just, I see it all the time, especially for you guys that call into the shop with all these kind of random problems. Usually it's as simple as a battery terminal. Not always, but again, something really easy. And then I spray them down once they're clean with some this battery terminal spray right here. And that's it. We'll get these Airdog mounts mounted up and we'll be good to go. All right, so since we got all new injectors, new pump, new lift pump, DDP sends this. We got about 10 gallons. We put a gallon in, then we got another 10 gallons. So I'm gonna put about a third of this in. And you always wanna put your fuel additive in before you add the fuel. That way, as you add the fuel, it kind of sloshes in there. That's about a third. We're gonna go ahead and add our fuel back in here and keep an eye on the sump, make sure we don't have any leaks. All right, so now we're gonna move on to the priming phase. On the 06, 07 trucks, if you turn the key to on, the lift pump will cycle, but if you bump start it, it'll stay on. And basically what you're listening for is a pitch change. Before you do this, I would recommend making sure all your connections are tight, or else you're gonna have a major leak. So again, lift pump comes on. You hear the pitch change. The Airdog does prime very quickly, which I'm a huge fan of. And they're very quiet. Now we're gonna go ahead, bump the key, get it to cycle again. All right, we can hear that pitch change. Now we're gonna go ahead, make sure everything's tight. Do a once over on all the filters. Water separator was a little tight. Again, at 200 gallons per hour, that leak is gonna be pretty apparent. So we are ready to fire up this pig. Again, we have not put our updated tune in here, so it might be a little smoky, might sound a little funky, but it's good enough to fire up and make sure she runs. Here we go. Also, full disclosure, while I was barring over the engine, about 4 teeth are missing off the flex plate. So it's still gonna start a little funky because that flex plate doesn't have all its teeth. Again, there's a lot of air in the system. You just saw the truck fire up. Has a little lope to it. That's totally normal. I would expect that on a truck that thought it had factory injectors, factory CP3. As soon as you raise it a little bit up, it smooths out. That's pretty normal with a stroker pump, especially with bigger injectors. So again, I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any leaks. Wanted to make sure the Airdog was doing its job. Last thing we're going to do is set the Airdog pressure. To do that, we're going to do it with the truck off. Obviously, it's running kind of rough, so it's not going to be very accurate. Because we're setting the pressure while the truck is off, I'm going to set it just a little bit higher. I'm going to set it at 16 because when the truck runs, it will drop the running PSI to the lift pump just about usually 1 or 2 PSI. So if we set it at 16, we should be golden at 15 with it running. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Airdog makes it really easy. There's an external bracket or external regulator, just a jam nut and a set screw, and we'll hook up our gauge. So setting the pressure is very simple. We have a gauge port right here. It takes a 3/16 Allen. We'll get that out. We'll get our gauge in here. And then again, Airdog, very easy. There is a jam nut right there and a flat blade screwdriver. You turn it in for more pressure, turn it out for less pressure. All right, now you grab a buddy. We got the jam nut loose. We got our pressure gauge here. Go ahead and bump it, Chad. All right, so we're sitting right at 16. We're gonna bump that down just a skosh. Actually 12. Okay, there we go. So when the grid heater is cycling, it lowers the voltage. So we need to go down a little bit. Not a big deal. Take your flathead screwdriver and lefty, less pressure. So we'll try a quarter turn. Go ahead, Chad, bump it. All right, we're at about 14. About 14 here. All right, grid heaters are off. We're at 16. So just a little bit more. Probably another quarter turn. Go ahead, bump it one more time, Chad. You're gonna have to bump the truck. All right, we're at 15. Grid heater came off. We're at like 15 and a half, 16. We'll call that good. Tighten up this jam nut. This is a 9/16. And you are done. No fuel, no mess. One of my absolute favorite parts about an Airdog. Thank you guys for staying with us this whole time. Again, it was a 2-part series. Just felt like I could break it down, make it easier for you guys to sort through the parts you needed to see. We wrapped up 625 studs, power-driven diesel valve springs, power-driven diesel push rods, a BD fuel distribution block. We have a Airdog 200 gallon per hour pump. Again, a huge thank you to those guys. They hooked it up on this project, so big thank you. I do recommend Airdog. Number one, they mount better. The quick disconnect fittings are nice. The harness is nice. I like the black line, and they're very quiet. And then, as you guys saw, adjusting it, easiest lift pump in my opinion to adjust. No leaks, no mess, just really easy to do. Then we installed a 12 mil CP3 and a set of 100% over injectors from our friends over at Dynamite Diesel. Again, whether it's stock to our race truck, those guys always have us taking care of. Good quality product that I can count on every time. So I always recommend people, whether you have 12 valve, 24 valve, common rail truck, stock to 3,000 horsepower, Dynamite Diesel probably has a solution for you guys. I'm going to leave this here. We're going to get it, the trans worked on next, because it's only a matter of time before this slips. So that will be the next video in the series, is us building the transmission. As always, like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate you guys. Until next time.